Today, I'm going to tell you my story, a morning that seemed peaceful but would forever change the course of my life. It begins in a house on the coast of Santa Barbara, a place I once believed was a symbol of love, of family, and of memory. A home my husband and I had spent nearly half our lives building. But then, in just a few short minutes, I realized that the people I loved most saw me as nothing but a burden. And when they returned, their key no longer opened that door. All that was left was a white envelope and the sound of a scream carried on the wind. If you've ever believed that love and family loyalty are constants, stay with me, because this story will make you think again. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you believe no one deserves to be treated like a burden in their own home. Welcome to Grandma Life Stories, where every tale is a journey of justice, self-respect, and the revival of a heart once broken. That morning, the California sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting a glow on the old wooden table where I made my tea each day. The scent of roses from the front garden drifted in, mingling with a faint hint of mint. I heard the footsteps of my son, Dylan, and his wife, Vanessa. They were coming down from upstairs, chatting and laughing about their upcoming business trip to Napa Valley. I smiled, quietly pouring more hot water into the teapot, my heart warming with that familiar feeling, the feeling of a mother who wants nothing more than to see her child happy. But then Vanessa's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up, and for some reason, the call was on speakerphone. I was about to turn it off for her when her crisp, cold voice made me freeze. "Honey, your mom is getting forgetful. I don't think she should be living alone anymore. Maybe it's time to look into a nursing home. They'll have people there to take care of her." A short pause, then Dylan's voice, deep but indifferent. "Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. The house could sell for $3 million. That's more than enough to cover her expenses, and we'd have capital to invest." $3 million. I heard every word, every breath they took. The sentence was a knife twisting in my heart. The teacup in my hand slipped from my fingers and shattered on the white tile floor. I stood frozen, not feeling the burn, not hearing anything but the pounding in my chest. The morning light suddenly seemed dim. The kitchen was still bright, but everything felt as cold as winter. I didn't step out. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there, listening as my son continued his planning. "We just have to convince her it's for the best. Tell her the place is near the ocean, with professional care. Once the house is sold, we can move into a bigger place." Vanessa let out a soft, calculated laugh. "I'll find the best place, but let me do the talking." "That's it. You get soft too easily." I couldn't believe that the son I had once held in my arms, the boy I'd stayed up all night for when he was sick, was now putting a price on the roof over my head. I didn't feel anger, or the urge to scream or break things. There was only one feeling, a profound hollowness. It was as if every memory, every sacrifice I had ever made, had just turned to smoke. I sank into a chair and looked out at the garden. The rose bushes I'd planted when my husband Robert was still alive were in full bloom. He used to say, "Honey, roses are only beautiful when someone is patient enough to care for them." I pressed my lips together and whispered to myself, "But people are different. You can tend to them with all your heart, and they can still wither." When Vanessa walked into the kitchen and saw me cleaning the floor, she feigned concern. "Oh, Mom, did you break another cup? I told you you need to be more careful. I think it's time you had some help." I looked up at her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on my face. "Yes, perhaps it's time for a change." She nodded, thinking I was agreeing with her. I just remained silent, the words $3 million echoing in my mind like a ticking clock. When Dylan came in, he placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice thick with false concern. "I just want you to be comfortable, Mom. You've done so much. It's time for you to rest." I looked directly into my son's eyes. For a moment, I realized the light was gone. The light of the little boy who used to cling to my hand during thunderstorms. Now there was only practicality, a coldness one usually finds in the eyes of a stranger. "You're right, Dylan," I said. "I'm tired. Perhaps it is time for things to change." That night the house was silent, save for the sound of the ocean waves and the ticking wall clock. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old envelope. The words, Living Trust, Robert and Marlene Fisher, 2009, were still perfectly clear. I turned to the first page, and there, in my husband's handwriting, it said, To my wife, Marlene Fisher, sole trustee. I took a deep breath. No tears fell. I smiled, the smile of a woman who had just realized she was not as weak as they thought. Robert, I whispered. They called me a burden. But you know what? The only burden in this house is their greed. I placed the document back in the envelope and looked out the window. The moon was rising, casting a silver light on the red-tiled roof. I leaned my head against the frame, listening to the wind rustling through the rose bushes. Something inside me had shifted. I no longer yearned for their love, no longer needed their understanding. All I wanted was peace. And sometimes, to find peace, you have to learn to close a door. Tomorrow, I would do something none of them could ever imagine. And when they returned, everything they believed was theirs would be theirs no longer. The following evening, the kitchen was lit once more. Vanessa set the table meticulously, as if preparing for honored guests. A white tablecloth, lavender-scented candles, silverware aligned in perfect rows. I watched, my heart as still as a lake surface, but beneath, the ripples were beginning to stir. The rich aroma of food filled the air, the scent of dishes I had personally taught Vanessa to cook. Now every flavor caught in my throat. Vanessa smiled at me, a gentle expression that an outsider might mistake for sincerity. Mom, I made your favorite salmon tonight, with a light olive oil salad. I nodded and sat down slowly, my gaze lingering on Robert's empty chair at the head of the table, now occupied only by the flickering candlelight. Dylan came over and pulled out my chair. Go on, Mom. Vanessa and I have a little something we'd like to talk to you about. I knew what was coming. I had overheard their entire plan. But I was in no rush. The one in a hurry is usually the one with less power. Vanessa raised her wine glass, her voice as soft as the breeze. Dylan and I were talking. We've noticed you've been tired lately, and this house is so big, so far from the city center. We thought, perhaps you should move to a quieter place, with professional care, a doctor on call, and a little garden for your flowers. You would be so much more comfortable, Dylan added, his voice sweet with a falseness I could now clearly detect. She's right, Mom. They would take wonderful care of you, so you wouldn't have to worry about a thing. I know you don't like being dependent on anyone, so we found the very best place. I cut a piece of salmon and slowly brought it to my lips. It tasted delicious, yet strangely bland. I looked at Vanessa. She couldn't hide her anticipation, her eyes gleaming like someone about to get exactly what they wanted. I set my fork down, my voice even, neither high nor low. Have you two thought this through? Dylan smiled, assuming I had softened. Of course, Mom. I just want you to be in a more comfortable place. I tilted my head slightly, my voice as light as a whisper. Comfortable? But for whom? The room fell silent. Vanessa's brow furrowed for a second before she quickly regained her composure. Mom, we're just worried about you, living here all by yourself. What if something happened? I looked deep into her eyes. You have a point. It can be dangerous to be alone, especially when there are people in the house who no longer see it as a home. Dylan flustered, tried to laugh it off. What a strange thing to say, Mom. We only want what's best for you. I smiled, placing my hand on my water glass, my tone warm but with an undercurrent of steel. I know, Dylan. You two have always thought I don't understand, but the truth is I've just been listening. And sometimes, silence is the only way to truly see a person's heart. Vanessa looked at me, the smile on her lips twisting slightly. Mom, don't think we have bad intentions. It's just that you're getting older. I cut her off, my gaze direct and sharp. Yes, I'm getting older, but I'm not a fool. Someone mentioned this house is worth $3 million. Does that sound familiar, Vanessa? The air in the room seemed to freeze. The fork in her hand slipped and clattered against her plate. Dylan's eyes widened as he looked at me, then at his wife. $3 million? What is she talking about? Vanessa stammered. I was just talking, Mom. You misunderstood." I held my smile, my eyes never leaving them. "It's all right. I'm not angry. Just next time, if you want to talk about me, remember to turn off your phone. The signal in this house is surprisingly strong. It picks up everything." Dylan was stunned, his face flushing with shame. Vanessa turned pale, her expression stripped bare. I stood up, pushing my chair back from the table, my voice almost eerily calm. "You two continue. I'm full, and don't worry, I will think about making a change. But what kind of change? I'll handle that myself." I turned and walked away. The candlelight cast my long, solitary shadow on the wall. Behind me, I heard Dylan whisper, his voice lost. "Vanessa, did you really say those things?" I was just trying to do what's best for you. Can't you see? She's different." "Different how?" "Her eyes. I've never seen anyone look at me like that." I heard every word but didn't turn back. The door closed behind me, as quiet as a final period. There was no hatred in my heart, just a cold, clear-eyed awakening. I knew from that moment on I was no longer the weak mother they thought I was. That night, I sat alone in Robert's study. Moonlight streamed onto his desk, reflecting off his photograph. I placed my hand on the frame and whispered, "Did you hear that, Robert? They said the thing I always feared most, but I'm not afraid anymore. Perhaps it's time for you to truly rest in peace." I opened the drawer and took out the old file labeled Living Trust. The papers were pristine, my name listed clearly, the sole heir. I smiled softly. "They want this house? Fine, I'll give them what they want. It just won't belong to them anymore." Outside, the ocean wind picked up. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks mingled with the rustling of the roses in the garden. I knew tomorrow things would begin to change, but not in the way they expected. That night, the house by the sea was steeped in silence. The distant crash of waves sounded like the ocean's breath, rhythmic but cold. I sat in Robert's study, a room I had rarely entered since he passed away. On the wall hung our faded wedding photograph. Robert stood beside me, his eyes warm, his hand resting securely on my shoulder. I stared at it for a long time, as if trying to hear the low timbre of his voice once more. I opened the wooden cabinet beneath his desk, where Robert had meticulously kept all important documents. Inside, everything still smelled of old wood and the passage of time. I sifted through the files until my fingers brushed against a thick envelope bearing his familiar handwriting. Living Trust, Robert and Marlene Fisher, 2009. I sat down, placed the envelope on the desk, and took a deep breath. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the yellowed edges of the paper. I opened it slowly, as if touching the past itself. Inside were neatly clipped pages. Robert's signature was in the bottom right corner, along with a note he once told me to remember, "To my wife, Marlene Fisher, sole trustee upon my passing." I read that phrase over and over, each word etching itself into my heart. I had forgotten, or perhaps I had chosen to forget, just how much Robert had trusted me. Since his death, I had lived quietly, letting Dylan and Vanessa make all the decisions, thinking it was the path to peace. I thought I was keeping the family together, but it turned out my silence had made them think I was weak. I picked up Robert's pen. The metal still bore the small scratch he'd gotten on his first business trip after we were married. I rolled it between my fingers, and his voice echoed in my mind, gentle but firm. "Marlene, one day, if they ever forget all you've done, you must remind them, not with words, but with action." I smiled, a smile that was neither happy nor sad, only clear. I understood. Robert hadn't just left me assets. He had left me the power of choice, and tonight I would choose for myself. I pulled another small handwritten letter from the envelope, one Robert had written shortly before he died. His script was shaky, but every line was clear. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone. I know you'll want to keep everything the same because you always put others before yourself. But Marlene, this house is yours, no one else's. If anyone ever makes you feel small in it, remember, you owe them nothing." I refolded the letter, my hand trembling slightly, but my heart was strangely calm. His words were like a small flame illuminating the entire room. I placed my hand on the document and whispered, "Robert, they think I've lost my mind, but maybe they've forgotten who helped you build these very walls. Don't you worry. I won't let this house fall into the hands of people who see it as just a price tag. I'll do exactly as you said." I took a fresh sheet of paper, placed it next to his old letter, and began to write. My handwriting was slow, clear, and steady. I wrote the name Harold Gibson, Robert's old friend and our trusted lawyer. He was the only one I could count on, the man who had witnessed every contract, every promise. I wrote a few lines. "Harold, I need to see you. Tomorrow, I need your help transferring ownership of the house. It's time to act." As I finished, the wall clock struck midnight. The house was silent, save for the steady ticking of the second hand. I looked around the room, the moonlight illuminating the small objects Robert had cherished. His silver compass, the book he'd left half read, the photo of us by the rose garden. I suddenly realized that the only thing of true value left in this house wasn't the property, but my self-respect. And I would not let anyone take that from me. I stood and walked out onto the balcony. The night sea was a dark, deep blue, with gentle waves lapping at the shore. I inhaled deeply, the salty air sharp on my tongue. I looked up at the sky and said softly, "Robert, I promise you, this will be the last time I shed a tear for them. Starting tomorrow, I will do what is right, not out of anger, but for the sake of justice." I went back inside, placed all the documents in the envelope, and set it on the desk next to Robert's pen. I added a small note on the cover, "For peace of mind." Then I turned off the light, leaving only the moonlight to illuminate those words. As I lay in bed, I didn't fall asleep right away. In the darkness, I listened to the waves. Each one felt like a reminder. No one can take away your worth unless you give it to them. I smiled to myself, placing a hand on my chest. Tomorrow, I would begin again. Not with resentment, but with the strength of clarity. Tomorrow morning, when the sun rose, I would call Harold. And when that call ended, everything would change. Not just the house, but me. The woman they thought was spent would rise, calmer and more resolute than ever before. The next morning, sunlight from the Santa Barbara Bay illuminated the small road leading to the town of Goleta. I was driving the old car Robert had bought over 20 years ago. The engine hummed steadily, a faithful old friend, though time had covered it in a thin layer of dust. I left the radio off. I wanted to hear only the wind and the beat of my own heart. The drive to Harold Gibson's law office wasn't long, but today it felt longer than usual. Perhaps because I knew that when I left, my life would turn a new page. There was no hesitation left in my mind, only the clarity of a woman who had lived half a lifetime to understand that sometimes silence is the most powerful form of protest. Harold was Robert's best friend. He had been a witness at our wedding and had notarized the living trust in 2009. When I walked into his office, he looked up from behind a large wooden desk. His eyes showed a flicker of surprise, which then settled into a quiet concern. "Marlene, it's been too long. Please, have a seat. I wasn't expecting you on a Monday morning." I sat down, my hands clutching the leather handbag on my lap. My voice was calm, without a trace of doubt. "Harold, I need your help selling the house in Santa Barbara." He frowned, tilting his head, trying to read my expression. "Are you sure you want to sell that house? It's what you and Robert built together. I remember him saying it wasn't just property, it was a repository of memories." I nodded slowly, my gaze direct. "That's right, Harold. But memories shouldn't be tainted by greed. I'm not selling the memories. I'm selling the illusion of ownership they thought they had." My words left Harold silent for a moment. He looked at me with a mixture of admiration and worry. "Dylan and his wife, do they know about this?" I shook my head. "Not yet, and they don't need to. They've said enough. Now it's my turn to act." You remember what Robert wrote in the trust, don't you? Harold nodded, flipping through a few pages in a thick file on his desk. Marlene Fisher, designated as the sole owner of all assets upon Robert's passing. He paused, looking at me. Are you certain about this? Once you sign, everything will be transferred to the trust. The house will no longer be yours. I gave a small smile, my voice even. The house was never truly mine to begin with, Harold. It belongs to whoever appreciates it. To them, it's just a commodity. Harold watched me for a long moment, then let out a deep sigh. You're just like Robert, Marlene. Both of you handle things quietly but decisively. All right, I'll prepare the transfer documents today. I nodded, pulling the envelope containing the living trust from my bag and placing it on his desk. Everything is here. I just want it handled legally, without any fuss, leaving no trail. I want the payment transferred directly into the Robert Fisher Family Trust. Harold opened the file, examining each page carefully. Light from the window illuminated his face, highlighting the wrinkles of a man who had witnessed too many lives change. The paperwork is perfectly valid. The house is still in your name. No one has any right to interfere. He looked up at me. What are you going to tell Dylan when he finds out? I shrugged. I don't need to say anything. Some lessons are only learned when it's too late. Harold let out a soft, sad chuckle. Robert would be proud of you. He always said, Marlene only needs to make one decision, and the whole world will shift around her. I remained silent. His words brought a lump to my throat, but I refused to cry. I hadn't come here to weep. I had come to end the weakness that had gone on for far too long. After nearly an hour, Harold pushed a contract across the desk toward me. The sun reflected off the nib of the pen. I took it. My hand trembled slightly, but my heart was firm. As the ink touched the paper, I felt a weight lift from my soul. Each stroke of the pen was a small incision, but it was also a release. When I finished signing, Harold quietly filed the papers. The transaction will be completed within 24 hours. The funds will go directly to the trust, $3,020,000, based on the current market value. He looked up, his eyes kind. Do you want me to notify the buyer? I shook my head. No need. Let things unfold naturally. I'm not selling to anyone specific. All that matters is that the house will have a new owner and I will have my peace. Harold nodded, then stood and walked around the desk. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice gentle but full of respect. You're doing the right thing. Sometimes justice doesn't need to be loud. A single signature is enough to change everything. I looked out the window. The Goleta sun reflected off the glass, and in my reflection, I saw a younger version of myself. No longer the weak, dismissed mother, but an autonomous, clear-headed woman who knew exactly what she was doing. As I stepped out of the office, a sea breeze blew in, carrying the scent of salt and wildflowers. I paused on the steps and closed my eyes. Everything felt lighter. In my handbag, the copy of the contract was still warm with fresh ink. I whispered, almost to myself, Robert, I finally did it. The old car started, rolling away from the law office. On the way home, I opened the window, letting the wind rush through my hair. I knew that when the sun set today, my house, or rather, the house they thought was theirs, would no longer belong to the Fisher family. It would belong to the truth, to a woman who had dared to stand up, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. And I, Marlene Fisher, for the first time in years, felt truly free. That evening, the house was filled with laughter again. Vanessa, in a beige dress, held a glass of wine as she sat on the sofa I had picked out with Robert. The soft yellow light cast a glow on her radiant face. Dylan sat beside her, his arm casually draped over her shoulder, his eyes shining with confidence. They were discussing the future, the changes they believed were just around the corner. We can remodel the entire kitchen after Mom moves out, Vanessa said, her voice full of excitement. I want to replace all the cabinets, repaint the walls, and install a glass door leading to the ocean. Can you imagine? Drinking coffee here every morning with the sunlight streaming into the dining room? It'll be gorgeous. Dylan smiled, clinking his wine glass against hers. I like that idea. We'll turn this place into our dream home. I stood on the staircase, looking down at the scene. It felt like a staged play, where two actors were flawlessly performing their roles as the devoted son and dutiful daughter-in-law. I wondered, was it my calm and trusting nature that made them think I was blind? Or had they simply never understood the meaning of gratitude? The faint smile on my lips faded. I turned and walked heavily up the stairs. Each step beneath my feet seemed to echo a memory. Dylan's childhood laughter, Robert's hand repainting the banister, a family Christmas dinner. They were all beautiful, fragmented pieces that had lost their warmth. In my room, I switched on a small lamp. Its weak light fell on the paintings I had done myself. Peaceful scenes of the rose garden, the summer sea, a moment of Robert laughing in the sun. I gently touched each canvas, a tightness in my chest. Every brushstroke was a piece of my life, but to them, they were just objects, things to be moved aside for a new design. I took a soft cloth and began taking down the frames. The metal was cold, covered in a thin layer of dust. With each painting I removed, I placed it gently on the floor, as carefully as if I were saying goodbye to a loved one. When the last one was off the wall, the room felt strangely bare. The warm colors were gone, leaving only cold, white walls. I looked around and realized this house, which I had once considered my home, was now just an empty shell. Downstairs, the laughter continued. Dylan was telling an amusing story, his voice full of pride. I think we should keep Dad's study and turn it into a reading room. I've always loved that space. Vanessa replied, Good idea. I'll hire someone to clean it out, get rid of the old stuff. Mom won't notice, she hardly goes in there anyway. My hand froze. Robert's study was the only place where I still felt his presence. They were going to throw that away too? I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window. The moon was rising, full and bright, casting its light on the red-tiled roof and the rose garden below. I whispered to myself, Robert, they've already forgotten you, and if I don't do something, they will forget me too. I opened the small drawer by my bed and took out a wooden box. Inside were a few old photographs, our wedding, Dylan as a toddler, our family by the Christmas tree. I flipped through them until my eyes landed on one, Robert carrying Dylan on his shoulders, both of them beaming. I gently touched their faces in the photo, and a single tear fell, but only one. I wouldn't allow myself to cry anymore. I took out a large canvas bag and began packing. The picture frames, a few books, the small keepsakes I wanted to bring with me. I worked slowly, each movement deliberate, as if I were preparing for a farewell ritual. No one knew it, but in my mind, everything was clear. When they left for their business trip, I would make my move. The clock struck 8. I heard Dylan call up, Mom, do you want some dessert? I called back, my voice steady. No, I'm tired. You two go ahead. Okay. Get some rest, Mom, Vanessa said, her voice as sweet as ever. I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it, listening as their footsteps faded away. When the house was quiet again, I looked around the space that had held my entire life's memories. Everything suddenly felt foreign. The room, the walls, the ceiling. None of it felt like it belonged to me anymore. I sat at my vanity and looked in the mirror. Who was this woman? Gray hair, tired eyes, a face etched with time. But in her gaze, there was something different. A small, quiet, and determined spark. I suddenly realized I had never been weak. I had just forgotten how to stand up. I smiled softly, a smile full of meaning. If they think I'm going to leave quietly, they are mistaken, I whispered to myself, my voice firm. I will leave, but not in the way they expect. I stood and looked around the room one last time. Everything was about to change. But this time, I was the one choosing the change. I turned off the light, leaving the room in the soft moonlight where the faint outlines of the removed frames remained on the wall, witnesses to an era that was about to end. That morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, reflecting off the polished wooden table. The air seemed peaceful, but beneath that golden glow was a silence as taut as a violin string. Dylan and Vanessa were dragging their suitcases to the door. The scent of Vanessa's expensive perfume mingled with the aroma of the coffee Marlene had just brewed. "We'll be in Napa Valley for 10 days, Dylan said, his voice bright. "This year's investment conference has a lot of partnership opportunities. If things go well, I could sign a few major deals." Vanessa beamed, her eyes sparkling. "And after that, we can arrange everything for you, Mom. A really comfortable place with a private nurse, an outdoor pool, and an ocean view. You'll love it." Marlene stood by the kitchen counter, holding a cup of chamomile tea. She smiled, a smile as light as the morning mist. "It sounds like paradise," she said, her voice calm. "But don't you worry about me. I'm still strong, and this house is where I feel most at peace." Vanessa came over and hugged her. The embrace was soft and gentle, but utterly hollow. "Promise you'll rest. Don't stress about bills. We'll handle everything soon." Marlene gently patted her back, her voice as soft as the sea breeze. "I'm sure you will." In that moment, her eyes narrowed slightly. Though her voice was gentle, her gaze held something else, an undercurrent about to rise. Dylan came over and kissed his mother's cheek. "I'll call every day. Make sure you eat well, Mom." "You don't have to worry," she replied. "I'll be busy, with a few small things." He smiled, oblivious, and then left with his wife. As the iron gate closed behind the sound of the engine, the house fell silent. Marlene watched through the window as the car turned onto the coastal road. A light breeze blew through, rustling the white curtains. In that instant, her expression changed. The gentle smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, steely resolve. She set her teacup down, wiped a stray drop of water from the counter, and took out her phone. The screen displayed Harold Gibson's name. She pressed call. Harold's deep, measured voice came through the line. "Marlene, I was waiting for your call." She spoke concisely, without a moment's hesitation. "We close the deal tomorrow." On the other end, Harold was silent for a moment before replying in a firm tone. "Everything is ready. They won't know a thing until it's done." "Good," she said, her eyes fixed on the sun-drenched front yard. "It's time they learn what respect means." She ended the call and stood still for a moment. Every sound in the familiar house seemed amplified: the ticking of the clock, the distant crash of waves, the creak of a wooden door in the wind. They were all witnesses to her irreversible decision. She walked slowly through the house. Each room, each object, evoked a memory. The living room where Dylan used to practice piano, the dining room where Robert read the paper every morning, the rose garden out back where they had planted every bush together. Now, those memories were no longer a comfort. They were the reason she had to act. Marlene paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking at the long stripes of sunlight on the wooden floor. She whispered, "Robert, you used to tell me never to let anyone take my kindness for granted. They've done just that." In the afternoon, she opened the small safe hidden behind her wardrobe and took out a stack of documents and an old jewelry box. Inside were simple items: her wedding ring, Robert's watch, a few insurance papers, and a photograph of the three of them on the day of Dylan's graduation. She held the photo, stared at it for a long time, then placed it back in the box. "You were once my greatest pride," she murmured. "But perhaps I loved you in a way that made you weak." As night fell, a thin mist settled over Santa Barbara. The lights from a neighbor's house cast a glow through the living room window, illuminating her figure at the desk. She was writing a list, meticulous, neat, each word penned with a steady hand. "Call Harold to confirm signing appointment. Pack personal items from the bedroom. Move all documents to the family trust safe deposit box. Contact the bank to wire funds to a private account. Arrange for movers. Leave the keys for the new owner." When she finished, she set the pen down and took a long, deep breath. Outside, the waves crashed rhythmically, in sync with her heartbeat, a steady rhythm, full of strength. That evening, Marlene ate a simple dinner, chicken soup and toast. On the table was a single plate, a glass of water, and a small candle. The boisterous meals filled with chatter were gone, but the quiet solitude made her feel free. Before going to bed, she opened the window and breathed in the salty sea air. The moonlight reflected in her eyes, cool and determined. 10 days, she said softly. Just 10 days, and everything will be different. The bedroom door closed. In the yard below, the roses continued to release their fragrance. Far away, the coastal highway led toward Napa Valley, where Dylan and Vanessa were beginning a trip they believed would change their lives. They had no idea that the only life about to truly change was Marlene's. Tomorrow, Santa Barbara would awaken to a great secret, and only one person knew that every passing minute was a step closer to a silent justice. That morning, Santa Barbara was bathed in a honey gold light. The light flooded through the large glass windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, wrapping the house in a final farewell glow. Marlene stood before the mirror, adjusting her scarf. Her face was serene, her eyes clear, showing no trace of the woman who had once trembled at the mention of a nursing home. The doorbell rang. A young man's voice called from the gate. "Good morning, Mrs. Fisher. We're here to see the house." She opened the door, a faint smile on her lips. Before her stood a young couple, perhaps in their early 30s, hand in hand. The husband, in a crisp white shirt, carried a notepad. The wife wore a floral dress, her blonde hair slightly tousled by the sea breeze. Their faces shone with excitement, the innocence of people dreaming of a future. "Come in," Marlene said, her voice soft and composed. "This house has seen more sunsets than most people see in a lifetime." They stepped inside, their eyes wide with wonder. Light poured through the windows, falling on the walls where family photos once hung. Now, only faint outlines remained, squares of faded color like marks left by time. The wife turned to her husband, her voice filled with emotion. "It's perfect. Look at this space. The light, the smell of the ocean, the details." The husband nodded. "It feels like a real home, not just a house." Marlene stood behind them, her hand lightly gripping the edge of her scarf, her eyes quietly observing. She saw in them a reflection of herself and Robert years ago, a time when they believed love was all you needed to build a home. "Do you live here alone?" the young woman asked, her gaze curious but sincere. Marlene nodded slightly. "For now. My husband built this place with his own hands. Every beam, every wall carries a piece of him." The woman whispered, "It's beautiful. You can feel the love." Marlene smiled, her voice softening. "It was built with love. I hope you take care of it." The young couple smiled and nodded, not fully grasping her meaning. They continued their tour, admiring each room, the bright kitchen with its marble countertops, the living room with its direct ocean view, the sun-drenched master bedroom. At every stop, Marlene watched them, a mixture of pride and farewell in her gaze. On the second-floor balcony, the wife turned back. "Mrs. Fisher, did you plant these roses?" "Every single one," she replied. "My husband used to say roses grow better when you talk to them kindly. I guess that's true for people, too." The husband laughed. "Then we'll make sure they're loved." She looked out at the garden, where the sun was blanketing the flowers. In that light, the rose petals seemed to glow, as if they understood that the person who had tended them was preparing to leave. When they returned to the living room, Harold Gibson had arrived. He smiled, a thick file in his hand. "Morning, Marlene." "Morning, folks. Everything's ready." Marlene nodded. "Let's finish this." The couple sat down, their hands intertwined. Harold turned each page, his calm voice reading the terms of the contract. The sound of a pen gliding across paper was quiet but decisive, like the final note of a long symphony. When it was her turn, Marlene picked up the pen. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the profound awareness that this moment would forever divide her life into a before and an after. She signed, her script slanting and firm. The light from the window shone on the table, so bright it was almost blinding. Harold smiled. "Congratulations. It's official." The young woman turned and took Marlene's hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. We'll take good care of it." Marlene replied, her voice soft but clear in the still air. "I know you will." When they left and the door closed behind them, the house was silent again. But it was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a decision made, of a woman who had reclaimed control of her own destiny. Marlene stood in the middle of the empty living room, listening to the distant sound of the waves. The light outside the window began to shift, turning a brilliant gold, like the final curtain falling on an era. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Goodbye, Robert. I kept my promise." From far away, the cry of a seagull echoed, the sound of freedom, of a new beginning. The next morning, Santa Barbara greeted a brilliant new day. The sky was clear, the ocean waves lapping gently against the white sand. But inside the house at 14 Maple Drive, the atmosphere was different. No more laughter, no scent of coffee, no familiar footsteps. Only the rumble of a moving truck and the thud of wooden crates echoing in the empty rooms. Marlene stood at the front door, arms crossed, watching two workers carry the last piece of furniture onto the truck. They worked quickly and politely. "Everything's labeled, ma'am. We'll take good care of it." She nodded. "Be careful with the wooden box. It's not valuable, but it's full of memories." Inside that box were seemingly small things: a scratched wedding ring, the notebook Robert used to track their expenses the first year they built the house, and a photo of the three of them on the porch in the summer of 1995. Each item held the breath of a lifetime. After signing the delivery slip, Marlene lingered in the doorway. Light streamed through the frame, casting a warm but unfamiliar golden glow on her face. The house was now completely empty. No wind rustling the curtains, no scent of chamomile tea. She took a deep breath and stepped outside. A sea breeze washed over her, carrying the scent of salt and sun, like a gentle final goodbye. The truck pulled away from Maple Drive, carrying everything she had chosen to take. Just enough memories, nothing more, nothing less. She got into her silver sedan and drove slowly south. Palm trees swayed on either side of the road, the blue ocean sparkling in the distance. A sign appeared, "Welcome to Carpinteria." Carpinteria was a small, quiet coastal town, just a 20-minute drive from Santa Barbara. She had come here with Robert years ago for short weekend picnics. "If we ever get old, this is where we'll live," he had once said. And now, here she was, alone, but not lonely. Her new apartment was on the second floor of a low, cream-colored building with a direct view of the ocean. It wasn't large, but it was bright and tidy. As she walked in, Marlene looked at the large window where sunlight was pouring onto a small pine dining table. She placed the wooden box on the table, removed her scarf, and sat down. For a few moments, she just sat there, listening to the distant waves. There was no one here, no voice calling out, "Mom," just silence. But it was the silence of freedom. She opened her bag and took out a sheet of stationery. Her script was neat and careful. The first line appeared slowly. "Dylan, my dear son, you said I should move." I listened. She paused, looking out the window. A light breeze made the paper tremble. Then she continued writing. "You told me I was becoming a burden. Maybe you were right. Maybe I had stayed too long in a house full of echoes. But you forgot who built those walls. You forgot the hands that laid the foundation. So I left. I left before you could take what was never yours." Each word was written evenly, slowly, like a heartbeat. No anger, no bitterness, just a mother speaking the truth with all the calm that age provides. "The house is gone, sold. $3 million now rest in the Fisher family trust, just as your father planned. That money will not build your dreams, Dylan. It will protect mine. I wish you peace, but peace comes only after truth." When she finished, she set the pen down, folded the letter, and placed it in a white envelope, sealing it with the red wax stamp Robert used to use for important documents. On the front, she wrote in a firm hand, "To my son." Beside the table, her laptop was open. The screen displayed her bank account, the Robert Fisher Family Trust. She clicked the mouse, entered the confirmation code. At that moment, the banking system displayed transaction processing. A green progress bar slowly filled. She watched it as if it were the breath of a new life. The phone rang. It was Harold Gibson. "Marlene," he said, his voice warm and deep. "The buyer's payment cleared. The funds are secured." "Thank you, Harold," she replied. "It's done then." "Everything went smoothly. You can rest now." She smiled softly. "Rest is a luxury, Harold. What I need is silence." After the call, she stood up and walked onto the balcony. The afternoon sea was turning a shade of jade, with white-capped waves rolling in under the sun. The wind blew through her silver hair, but her expression was one of profound peace. In the small apartment, the boxes remained unopened. On the table, the white letter lay next to the laptop, its screen still glowing with the words, "Transaction complete." Everything had happened quietly, but behind it was a powerful undercurrent, the tide of awakening, of a woman once dismissed who was now reclaiming her life. As sunset approached, Marlene brewed a cup of chamomile tea and took a slow sip. She looked out at the ocean, where the sun was sinking below the horizon. The fiery red light flooded the room, illuminating Robert's photograph on the table. "I kept my promise, Robert," she whispered. "No tears, no begging, just action." That night, the sound of the ocean mingled with the wind whistling through the doorframe. The new home settled into a deep quiet. An old chapter had closed, and a new one had begun. Where the woman once called a burden was now shouldering the weight of her own justice. 10 days later, the morning in Santa Barbara was so beautiful it seemed harmless. Sunlight shimmered on the ocean's surface like shattered glass. Dylan drove his sleek black SUV down the familiar road, Vanessa beside him, her face beaming. They had just returned from the investment conference in Napa Valley, armed with new business cards, promises of partnerships, and the conviction that a brilliant future was unfolding before them. "Do you think Mom will be happy to hear about this deal?" Vanessa asked, glancing in the rearview mirror to touch up her lipstick. Dylan chuckled confidently. "Depends on her mood, but after 10 days of rest, she's probably realized that moving to a care facility is what's best for her." His wife smiled, her hand slipping into his. "And then we can start renovating the house. An open-plan kitchen, white walls, a big island. I can see it all now." Dylan glanced at her, a faint smile on his lips. "As long as Mom agrees to sell, it's a done deal." The car turned onto Maple Drive, where the palm trees lining the road swayed in the sun. They pulled up to the familiar cream-colored house. But something was off. The flower beds were neatly trimmed, the windows were sparkling clean, and new curtains hung in the windows. Vanessa frowned. "Did someone come to clean? I don't remember hiring anyone." Dylan got out of the car, his brow furrowed as he looked at the lock. He inserted his key and turned. The door didn't budge. He tried again, harder. The sound of metal on metal was dry and final. "What is this?" he muttered. "Why is the lock different?" Vanessa walked up to the door and tried the handle. It wouldn't turn either. She looked down, surprised. "Dylan, when did we get this new doormat? And what's that little sign?" Right in front of the door, on the new mat, lay a crisp white envelope. It wasn't carelessly placed or hidden. It was lying there, perfectly centered, as if left with intention. On the front, a few words in familiar handwriting. "To my son." Dylan's heart pounded as he bent down. He recognized the script, his mother's. He picked it up and looked around. Her car was gone. There was no sign of anyone in the house. Vanessa took his arm, her voice low. "Open it." He tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in half. The handwriting was neat, its calmness almost chilling. He read aloud, each word like a cold blade. "You said I should move. I listened." He paused, looking at Vanessa, then continued reading, his voice faltering. "You told me I was a burden. You told me to rest, to let you handle everything soon. I trusted you would, so I made it easy for you." Vanessa swallowed hard, her heart hammering. Dylan flipped to the second page. "The house is gone. Sold. $3 million now rests safely in the Fisher Family Trust. You wanted freedom. Now we both have it." His hand began to tremble. He looked around as if he couldn't believe his own eyes. Vanessa snatched the letter from him, her eyes scanning the words before she gasped. "She sold it? Without telling us?" He took a step back, his face flushing. "Impossible. She can't legally—" Before he could finish, a man's voice called out from behind them. "Excuse me, are you the previous owners?" They turned. A young, friendly couple stood at the gate, the new buyers. The husband raised a hand in greeting. "We just moved in this morning. The agent said you might stop by." Vanessa froze, speechless. Dylan clenched the envelope in his hand and asked through gritted teeth, "You bought this house?" The wife smiled. "Yes, from Mrs. Fisher. She was lovely, left us cookies and a note saying, 'Welcome home.'" Those last words were like a final, twisting knife. Vanessa stumbled back, her smile contorting into a grimace. Dylan turned away, biting his lip. He looked at the house. His house. That was no longer his. Where is she now?" he asked. The young husband shrugged. "She didn't say, just smiled and wished us happiness." Vanessa grabbed her husband's arm. "Dylan, do something. Call her. Tell her this is insane." He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then an automated voice answered. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." The wind caught the letter in his hand, sending it fluttering through the air before it landed on the doorstep. The sunlight illuminated the last line, making it glow. "Don't worry, my son. I found peace. Something money can't buy." Vanessa bent to pick it up, reading it under her breath. Her face went pale. "She's lost her mind," she whispered. Dylan shook his head, his eyes burning with a mixture of regret and rage. "No, she wasn't. She knew exactly what she was doing." He stood there for a long time, watching through the window as strangers arranged furniture inside. The familiar sounds, the creak of a door, the clink of dishes, now echoed like a funeral bell for everything he had lost. He understood then that it was over. The house was no longer a home, and the woman he called his mother, the woman he had treated like a burden, had left quietly, but had left behind a wound that would never heal. The young couple went back inside and closed the door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was sharp, cold, and final. Dylan remained standing there, the sun on his face highlighting his stunned expression. Vanessa let go of his arm and walked back to the car. He couldn't take his eyes off the house. On the threshold, the folded letter lay still in the sun. The sea breeze picked up again, carrying the scent of salt and roses from the garden Marlene had tended. The fragrance lingered, a familiar yet distant farewell, and in that moment, Dylan knew his mother had won. Not with power, but with absolute, unbreakable silence. That afternoon, the Santa Barbara sun was still brilliant, but Dylan's world had gone dark. He sat in the car, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. Vanessa was silent, her eyes swollen from crying, but her expression held a bitterness that went deeper than tears. Neither of them spoke on the drive from Maple Drive to the law office in Goleta. The sign, Harold Gibson, Attorney at Law, came into view. Dylan slammed on the brakes, got out, and slammed the car door behind him. Vanessa called out, "Dylan, don't make a scene. Maybe there's still a way." He cut her off. "A way? A way to get back something my mother sold legally?" The office door opened with the jingle of a small bell. The air inside was cool and quiet, smelling of old wood and faint coffee. Behind the desk sat Harold Gibson, his silver hair neat, his gaze calm. He looked up as Dylan stormed in. "Dylan Fisher," Harold said, his voice even. "I suspected you'd be stopping by." Dylan threw the letter on the desk. "You knew about this, didn't you? You helped her sell my house." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Your house? I believe we're talking about Marlene Fisher's house. Vanessa approached, trying to keep her voice gentle. Mr. Gibson, there must be a misunderstanding. We're the legal heirs. She's not in her right mind. We were only trying to help. Harold leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold. I've heard that line more times than you can imagine, and I always wonder, the people who are helping, who are they really helping? Dylan slammed his hand on the desk. You don't understand. I'm her son. I have rights. Harold's expression didn't change. He opened a drawer, pulled out a thin file, and pushed it toward him. Read this. Dylan opened it. The first line hit him like a punch. Living Trust, 2009, Robert and Marlene Fisher. Below it was his father's signature and a notary's seal. Harold spoke slowly, enunciating every word. The house was placed in a living trust in 2009. When Robert passed, Marlene became the sole trustee. You are not a co-owner, and you have no legal standing to interfere. The transaction was perfectly legal and fully authorized. Dylan stared at him, dumbfounded. You're saying she planned this? Harold looked him straight in the eye, his voice low. No, Dylan. Robert planned this. He knew his son was ambitious, and he believed that if the day ever came when greed overshadowed love, Marlene would be the one to protect their legacy. The room fell silent. Vanessa clutched her purse, staring at the floor. Dylan narrowed his eyes. You're telling me my own father didn't trust me? It's not that he didn't trust you, Harold replied. He just knew that people change when faced with money, and Robert loved Marlene enough not to let her be pushed out of the home they built. Vanessa interjected, her voice trembling. Mr. Harold, I understand. But if she was truly okay, why would she leave without a word? Why wouldn't she talk to her own son? Harold looked at her for a long moment before answering softly. Because some conversations are meaningless once respect has been lost. The words struck like a physical blow. Vanessa turned her face away. Dylan took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. You helped her. You betrayed my family. Harold stood, his eyes not angry, only sad. I helped the Fisher family. I did not help someone who saw his own mother as a burden. Dylan clenched his fists. You think I'm some kind of monster? I just wanted what was best for her. Harold walked closer, placing a hand on the document. What was best for her, or what was best for you? Have you forgotten, Dylan? That woman sold her own jewelry so you could go to college. This house exists because of her hands. All you wanted was to turn it into cash. The accusation hit Dylan like a slap. He recoiled, his shoulders shaking. Vanessa started to speak, but Harold's voice continued, slow and cold as steel. Justice is not something you can demand when you are the one who has denied it. The room was utterly still. The wall clock ticked steadily. Dylan hung his head, his hands clenched. I'll get another lawyer. I'll sue. Harold replied calmly, Go ahead, but you will lose. Not because of the law, but because you lost in your mother's heart a long time ago. Dylan was silent. The words left him with nothing to say. He turned and stormed out, pulling the door so hard the bell rang violently. Vanessa hurried after him. Dylan, wait for me! The door closed, leaving Harold standing in his office, the sunlight falling on the open file. He shook his head and sighed. You were right, Robert. The boy wouldn't learn when things were easy. He would only learn after he lost everything. Outside, Dylan and Vanessa rushed to the parking lot. She grabbed his arm. We can't let her win. We'll get it back. Dylan stopped, his eyes red, his voice hoarse. You don't get it. She didn't just win. She taught me a lesson I'll spend the rest of my life trying to forget. He opened the car door and threw the legal papers onto the seat. In the afternoon light, the words, Robert and Marlene Fisher Living Trust, gleamed mockingly, a reminder of everything he had thrown away. The car pulled away from Goleta, leaving behind the law office and a verdict that required no judge, the crime of filial neglect, sentenced to a lifetime of silence. On the coastal highway, the late afternoon sun slanted across the landscape, bathing the interior of the speeding SUV in a golden light. No one spoke. There was only the steady hum of the engine and the ragged breathing of two people reeling from a humiliating defeat. Dylan gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His gaze was fixed on the road ahead, but he saw nothing. Vanessa sat beside him, her face tear-stained, but her expression hardening. She turned to him, her voice choked. "I can't believe she would do that. She's an old woman. How could she have managed all of this so quickly by herself?" Dylan let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You really thought she was weak, didn't you? That woman spent her entire life getting by without anyone's help. I was the fool for forgetting that." Vanessa turned on him, her voice rising. "And you think I'm happy about this? Do you have any idea what it's like living with someone who constantly makes you feel small?" Dylan shot her a look. "Small? She gave us a roof over our heads, paid off your car, helped me start my company, helped you launch your business. If anything made you feel small, Vanessa, it was your own lack of gratitude." She slammed her hand on the dashboard. The sound cracked through the car. "Yes, I lack gratitude. Because for years I've had to live in her shadow. It was always my mother this or my mother that, and you're no different. You'd rather be a good son than my husband." Dylan whipped his head around, his eyes blazing. "I gave up everything to stay in that house. For you. You were the one who said selling it would let us start over. Well, congratulations. You can start over now, with nothing." The air in the car grew thick and heavy. For several seconds, they were silent, hearing only the distant crash of the waves. The sun streamed through the windshield, illuminating their faces. Two people contorted by anger, disappointment, and self-loathing. Vanessa turned away, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. When I saw her walking through that house, touching everything with the hands that built it, I felt invisible. I couldn't stand it." Dylan scoffed, his laugh bitter. "You couldn't stand it, so you decided to destroy it. Did you think taking that house would make you bigger than her? In reality, you just proved she's 100 times stronger than we'll ever be." Vanessa bit her lip, fresh tears falling. "I just wanted something of my own, something that didn't have her name on it." Dylan's voice was like ice. "Congratulations, Vanessa. Now you have it. Nothing with her name on it, and nothing with ours either." His words landed like a final blow. The tension in the car was unbearable. Vanessa turned away, staring out at the ocean. The brilliant sunset was reflected in her eyes, but they were empty. "You're right," she whispered. "She won." Dylan answered without looking at her. "No, she just took back what was always hers." The car continued down the winding road, the wind whipping through Vanessa's hair. She buried her head in her hands and sobbed. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of red, as if staining the scene with blood. Dylan pulled over and got out. He stood on the side of the road, staring at the churning ocean. Vanessa followed, her heels sinking into the sand. They stood side by side in silence. "What are you going to do now?" she asked weakly. "I don't know," Dylan replied. "Maybe for the first time in my life, I'll have to stand on my own 2 feet." He turned to her. "And what will you do, now that you have no one left to blame?" Vanessa didn't answer. She just watched the waves crash ashore, their sound mingling with the wind and the low hum of the highway behind them. She let out a soft, defeated laugh and sank onto the guardrail. The camera cuts between them, red-rimmed eyes, trembling hands, the harsh glare of the setting sun, the violent reflection of light on the water. It all blends into a jarring, tense rhythm. The audience feels it viscerally. They are being crushed by the weight of their own greed and arrogance. The car pulls back onto the road, their figures shrinking in the distance. In the sky, the crimson sunset bleeds across the ocean like an unhealed wound, a symbol of the price of betrayal. Morning in Carpinteria. The sky was a flawless blue, and the sound of the ocean was a steady rhythm outside the window. The early sun filled the small apartment where Marlene Fisher was beginning her day, just as she had always dreamed. In peace. free from reproachful words and scrutinizing eyes. She put the kettle on, and the scent of Earl Grey tea soon filled the small room. The dining table was set for one, but it felt full of life. The walls were adorned with her own paintings, a blue sea, fields of lavender, her old house seen from a distance. On a shelf sat a black and white photograph of Robert, her late husband. She spoke softly, as if in conversation with him. "You see, my love? We're near the ocean again, but this time it's not to hide. It's to start over." The kettle whistled. She poured the tea, stirring it gently. The light danced on the cup, shimmering like a hard-won piece after a storm. The landline rang. It was Harold Gibson. His warm, deep voice came through the speaker. "Congratulations, Marlene. The Robert Fisher Art Scholarship Foundation was officially approved this morning." She smiled, her voice as light as a breath. "That's wonderful. Robert always wanted to help talented children who loved art but lacked the means. I want the entire sum from the trust transferred to the foundation." Harold hesitated. "Marlene, are you sure? That money is more than enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life." She chuckled softly, her voice gentle but firm. "I've never lived for comfort, Harold. I've only ever wanted peace of mind, and I believe that when you use money for something good, you can never truly be poor." In that moment, the audience feels a quiet power, the strength of freedom and forgiveness. After the call, Marlene opened the window. A sea breeze blew in, carrying the scent of salt and the cry of gulls. She stepped onto the balcony, teacup in hand, and watched the small fishing boats leave the harbor. An elderly neighbor watering her plants in the courtyard below looked up and smiled. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Marlene returned the smile, her expression serene. "It is. Every morning feels beautiful when it's your own." She went back inside and sat at her table, taking out a sketchbook. The first page held an unfinished drawing. Her old house in Santa Barbara, light streaming through a window, with the faint silhouette of a woman standing inside. She looked at it for a long time, then wrote in the margin, "Forgive, but never forget." The audience sees clearly. She holds no hatred, no pride. Only the clarity that comes after a long journey of pain and betrayal. Her phone buzzed. A text from Harold. "The foundation announcement will be published next week. Local news might want an interview." Marlene looked at the message, thought for a moment, and replied, "Let them. Maybe someone will remember Robert and learn something about a love that doesn't fade." The camera focuses on her hand resting on the scholarship application. Her fingers are thin but steady. The wrinkles on her skin tell a story of a life that has endured, forgiven, and ultimately chosen to leave behind light instead of darkness. A small, stray cat wandered in through the open door. It meowed softly and rubbed against her leg. Marlene bent down and stroked its head. "Hello there, little wanderer. You found a home too, huh?" The cat looked up, its blue eyes shining in the sun. The background music softens to a gentle piano melody. The camera pulls back slowly, showing Marlene in her small room, surrounded by light, her paintings, and the warmth of a life just beginning. On the screen, text appears. "Not all new beginnings need applause. Sometimes all they need is silence and the return of peace." The audience understands. Justice has been served, not with a scream, but with the quiet tranquility of a woman who let go, but only after taking back what was rightfully hers. Night fell over the town of Carpinteria. The steady rhythm of the waves crashing on the shore mingled with the sound of the wind rustling through the palm trees outside the balcony. Inside her small apartment, Marlene sat quietly by the window, a cup of cold tea in her hand. The warm lamplight illuminated her face, serene, yet her gaze was distant, as if watching something out in the dark sea. On the table, a small letter lay neatly folded. The envelope read, "To Dylan." She hadn't sent it. Perhaps she never would. She opened it and reread the words she had written. "My son, sometimes loss is the only way we learn the value of what we once had. I am not angry, nor do I have regrets. I only hope you learn that love is not a commodity to be bought or sold. The house is gone, but the roots are still there. in memory, and in the kindness you are still capable of. If one day you find the courage to start over, do it without stepping on anyone to climb higher, Mom, Marlene. Mom. She refolded the letter and placed it beneath Robert's photograph. Her voice was low, as if speaking to herself. You see, Robert, in the end, I still can't bring myself to hate him. It's just, there's no room to open that door for him again. The wind blew harder, making the curtains sway. The camera panned slowly across the room, the paintings on the wall, the cold teacup, the soft light. On the corner of the table, a new card from Harold. The Robert Fisher Foundation has been officially recognized. The launch ceremony is next week. Marlene picked up the card and smiled. He would be so proud, Harold, she whispered. Robert spent his life believing that things only have meaning when they are shared. Perhaps now I understand that too. She stood and walked out onto the balcony. Before her was the vast ocean, the moonlight reflecting on the water like a silver ribbon. The waves rolled in, crashing against the rocks, a steady, powerful heartbeat. In the distance, car headlights flashed across the coastal road. A young couple walked by, laughing and holding each other, their bright forms reflected in the glass where Marlene stood. She smiled at them, then turned, went inside, and gently closed the sliding door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was soft but final. In that moment, the audience understands. The door she closed didn't just shut out the night breeze, it shut out the past. The old house, the hurt, the cruel words, they were all on the other side. Inside, there was only a woman who had found herself again. She sat down and opened her sketchbook. On a clean white page, she began to draw a closed door. Outside was the dark ocean. Inside was a warm light. Beneath the drawing, she wrote a final caption. Revenge isn't shouting. Sometimes it's just a door that doesn't open anymore. The camera slowly pulls away. Through the small window, her silhouette is visible, small but strong, bathed in a warm glow. Her apartment shines like a beacon in the night, a quiet testament that justice isn't about retaliation, but about knowing when to close the door for good. The music swells, a quiet piano melody interwoven with the sound of the ocean. The final shot is the night sky reflected on the water as text fades in slowly. Some doors are not meant to be reopened, because sometimes silence is how justice finds its voice. The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of the waves, gentle, constant, and eternal.